back to the conversations I would have with trainers about the use of a condition reinforcer, a lot of them would say, oh, I don't do that clicker stuff. I don't do that marker thing. And I would just say to them, okay, let me ask you this, though. When you say no, nine, or phooey, what does your dog expect to have happen next? And they're like, oh, it's going to get corrected.
Physical correction.
I said, okay, so that's a marker. You're just using it to mean a aversive. I'm using a marker that means a positive.
Welcome to Police Canine Radio. Rich, what's going on?
Got a lot going on today. We're talking detection today, and honestly, we probably don't give enough attention to detection. I think you and I both like to focus on the fun stuff. Not to say that detection's not fun, but it definitely gets a backseat sometimes. And, when guys think about being a canine handler, they get all excited about sending their dog, apprehend somebody. That's the fun stuff. But I think we all know using the dog's nose and really doing what we talk about when we say, hey, why are you going to get a canine? The most valuable part of the canine is the dog's nose. Finding people, finding shit that are not supposed to have, weapons, guns, explosives, all those things. If we're doing our job correctly, we should be relying on the dog's nose most of the time and their teeth the least amount of time. But the sexy part is the bites, right? It gets everybody going. But the nose work, the scent work, the detection is really the meat and potatoes of what we're asking our dogs to do, whether it's finding somebody or finding something. And that's what they're really, really good at. We all know how to use force. We just like having the dog as a tool. But we all don't know how to find stuff that's difficult to find. And that's where the dog really shines. And today we're going to talk to our guest, Cameron Ford, about that, because he is all things detection, and we're going to let him introduce himself and kind of tell us how he got here. Do a quick bio. We all know who you are. We know what you're doing in the industry, but we just had this conversation before we started rolling tape, and there's some people across the world and the country that are a little bit out of the loop on the new things that are happening in the detection world. So if you don't mind introducing yourself and telling us how you got here.
Sure. Cameron Ford, and I own Ford Canine. My background started off in the military as a typical military working dog handler in the Air Force. But that afforded me the opportunity. I was stationed in Germany, and then that gave me a chance to then learn a lot of the European systems of dog training, specifically in the police side of things. So my last year in the Air Force, I got invited to the German Polizei Handler School, and a friend of mine was a German Polizei handler, and he was kind of teaching the class, but spoke perfect English, so it was like a perfect little melding of U.S. Air Force and the Polizei there locally. So I got to go to that school, learned a lot of different things. And in that exact same time, the internet was growing in the dog world. And living in Germany, I ended up coming across Simon Prinz, who's another well-known detection dog trainer. And Simon was a young, brand new trainer, handler in the Dutch police, gave me an invite out to Holland. And then I went out to Nunspeet, where their little headquarters is for detection. And got to spend some time with him, and one of the biggest names in their research side of it was a lady named Dr. Ade Schoen. So she was at that office. So they have a really unique thing in Holland, which is the scientist, the trainers, and the handlers all have the same location to work at. So that was my first kind of exposure there. Fast forwarding, then I came back to the States, had my own business way back in the day called Universal Canine. That's going to be a memory lane thing for a lot of handlers back in Florida. And the funny part, there was actually two Universal Canines. Years later, some other guy had used the same name in a Texas, San Antonio area, gets in trouble with the federal government. For a little while, people thought, wait, you were in San Antonio?
Yeah,
and
I heard you got in trouble,
no,
man.
not the same one, different one. But anyway, after that, I haven't had that business in Florida for about 5 or 6 years. And I had a crazy offer on property that I had 10 acres for that place, and got offered crazy money during the housing boom. And so I took it, found myself in law enforcement, became a cop, worked as a cop in Florida. And then later, as I was kind of chasing the dog dream, I ended up going to Texas in a contractor role, but then ended up becoming a certified police officer in Texas as well, working as a reservist, not full-time. And did that for a little bit of time, came back, and then found my way to the Navy SEAL program about a year after I had finished the work in Texas that I was working with on the projects that we had, because the wars had drawn down at that time, so we're talking now 2013-ish, and found myself, Jeff Franklin, a friend of mine at the time, had said, hey, what are you doing? I'm like, not much. I need, anything you got, let me know. And he had done that to me before. Hits me up August 1st and was like, hey, can you be in San Diego? And I was like, how soon? He's like, as fast as you can. So ended up in San Diego. Fast forward, and that's where you guys came out that one time and did a visit, and worked with SEAL teams for about 4.5 years. And at that time, I was starting to kind of go, what do I want to do? And the SEAL team stuff was starting to slow down a little bit. But what happened to me was I kind of towed a line within the SEAL teams, which was, hey, we cared a lot about training and certain types of training that were really important to the mission. We had a brand new veterinarian that was from the Army side that was our interim program manager for the Navy SEAL side of things. So that caused some rub between us that wanted to do very operational things and a veterinarian who kind of wanted to do a lot of things, including a lot of vet care stuff, which was good. But there was some things that, as far as priorities go, as far as what we felt as instructors and team guys were going through. So the long story short was they created a rule to my boss, which was, hey, after basically 4 years, you have to change your people out. So yeah, I graduated SEAL Team 3 and then walked off like the little thing that we were doing the graduation at. And Jeff's like, here, look at my phone. So I look at the phone. It's a long email basically telling him like, hey, you have to, because our contracts had to renew every year, October 1st. So graduate these guys September 27th, thinking that I was going to have to go to pass an ID, get my new ID before I go on my break because I was taking a vacation. And he was like, so read this and you can call it fired. You can call it, he's like, you can call it, he's like, because I'm not letting you, I'm not firing. He's like, but this is our new rule. So he's like, call it what you want. You can call it
an opportunity to move on.
Yeah. And the word, and the truth of it was,
we'll still be friends.
Yeah. And the truth of it was, it just wasn't being renewed, by definition. Right.
No,
so that's why he was like saying to me, hey, look, you can call it being fired if you want to, but technically they're just saying they're not renewing it. And then there's a guy right behind me that was the next one that was on the chopping block based on that new quote unquote standard. So with that said, that, like you said, afforded opportunity, which I didn't know at the time, when that happens, because again, in the background, I was already kind of looking, I had done a lot of stuff. I'd been there for 4 years plus, and I was looking at other opportunities to go into. I knew that the writing was on the wall for that, with the teams not deploying as often and the war being drawn down. Our work was going to shift in some way or another. So I was just kind of like half-assed and like looking around like, hey, if the right opportunity comes along, maybe I'll move on. Well, that forced that issue pretty quickly. But that also kind of made me become resourceful in the sense of this is where I had to make a decision. Like a lot of people ask, I had 25 years of doing bite dog related stuff, dual purpose related stuff. And I looked at the landscape of the dog industry and there wasn't anybody really focusing on detection. And in that time with the SEALs is kind of where I got deeper into the science world because there was cognition, as you guys have heard me talk about before. Dr. Brian Hare from Duke University was somebody who I saw on TV, reached out via email, said, this is where I work. Could you help us become better about what we're doing? And the cognition stuff was more about selecting dogs, being better about selecting dogs. But that opened that door to the science world. And that pushed me into, that's how I found Dr. Nathan Hall later on, Dr. Lauren DeGrief, all the ones that are bigger in the chemistry side of things, Dr. Paula Tiedemann. But I saw that shift that was happening. There wasn't a whole lot in detection at all, really, hardly anybody. And everybody was already doing all the tactical cool stuff. Everybody wanted the long gun, the kit, the whole 9 yards. And I was like, yeah, I get it. I know it. And I still will dabble in it from time to time. But I see an opportunity over here. There's no attention to this realm. And this realm has been operating, detection had been doing its same kind of way for 25, 30 years, maybe obviously probably longer at that point. Didn't evolve very much. And we were at the cusp of an evolution. So that's what drove me towards detection. That's when I kind of started. I went to a friend of mine. They had a business in Las Vegas called Silver State K9. It was retired. He was customs and she was ATF. And I was working with them. As you guys probably remember, you've been out there.
I was down there, yeah.
Yeah. So they had an awesome facility. They were in that semi-retirement mode. And it gave me a place to get really going. And then COVID hit. And when COVID hit, they were like, we're kind of retired and you kind of made this place a lot busier than it used to be. And we're probably not going to go back to that same level after COVID. If we get allowed to go, because at that time, no one knew we could go back to work and when that would be. So they're like, we're probably not. So go get your license. Go get your license in Nevada. So I did. And that's Ford K9 existed for the podcast because the podcast K9's Talking Sense started off we started out in 2019. Me and you
Yeah,
were at
yeah,
the
right about the same time.
at the
Yeah, yeah.
CNCA conference.
That's right.
And we were both booth by booth, setting up our microphones, and my microphone was facing other direction. I had it so messed up. But anyhow, that's kind of where that trajectory started. There was that from the Silver State to COVID to Ford K9 being not just a business that ran the podcast, but then a business that was focused on training and focusing heavily towards detection dogs.
When you started going down that path, did you realize that you had obviously you knew enough to be comfortable to take that on, but did you start to realize, especially when you get involved with the scientists and the doctors and everybody, like, I have a lot more to learn than maybe I anticipated?
It's not even funny. I mean, I had so many different aha moments over the course of 3 years from let's say 2018, end of 2018 to 2022-ish. And it was just, I thought I knew stuff and I felt comfortable with it. And then I would be given information, kind of go through that information and say, is this really relevant? Is it research only? Does it translate to working? And there are some really good research or things that come out of research, but they have a small number of dogs they've tested. So there's a theory there that seems to be relevant or seems to be true. But when you start expanding that to a lot more dogs or the setting is different, this is where the practitioner, the law enforcement, military, professional, etc., that will hear things about research and raise an eyebrow or have skepticism, and rightly so. But with that said, there's truth there. And what research is really doing now is starting to go deeper and deeper and deeper and continue to prove some of their points that they were making. Also realize that some of the things that were discovered are really specific and not necessarily meaning it branches out to everything else. So that was, like you said, I've had the various aha moments. I still do, which we can get into as we progress in the conversation. But there's so much we don't know, and mixed with lots of years of believing things that we have. What I kind of refer to a lot of times when people use the same term, sacred cows. These are the things that we hold on to very dearly, and through our experience, they've proven to work. And like I share everybody, I agree with that. A lot of them I did. But my goal is to how can I be better? And is there things I can do to be better about what I'm doing with some of the information that's being provided to us now that we never had access to even 10 years ago?
Yeah. So for our listeners, if you're watching this podcast, I just want to kind of give you a rundown of what you can expect, because we could actually have hours of conversation. And I read your article, Clear Communication.
Oh, wow.
2009, 2010, and it was back when we were starting to play with markers, which has revolutionized how we train. So thank you for writing that article, because that spurred on, it was actually a catalyst for me to really delve into that. But if you're running a detection dog, you're going to want to watch this podcast. We're going to talk aha moments. We're going to talk fentanyl. We're going to talk imprinting.
What? Training?
Yes, training. Let's talk some basics. Why we don't use towels anymore. Should we be using towels? Should we be going back? I love your attitude of let's challenge the way we've been doing things. We're going to talk science. If you're against Cameron, you're against science. Right here, you heard it.
I think it goes back. We were just watching the Olympics. They were just on, right? And they were talking about the difference in sprint times, run times now compared to the Olympics in the 1960s. Were the people in the 60s fast? Yeah. Did they have the capability to be as fast as people are now? Probably. What was different? Technology, training, shoes, those kind of things, right? So were they doing everything right? With the information they had in the 60s, they were doing everything right. But there's new information now. People didn't just get faster. Somebody trained them how to be faster. I mean, I'm sure there's genetics involved, but there was science involved. And it's
Sure.
I think it's irresponsible for all of us to not look at the science and be like, how can we make this better? And I think that was the first thing that we have on our list of questions are imprint techniques. And when we talk about that, and we know that it's actually training, we know imprinting happens with puppies. We have already gone down that, but we're going to talk
had that conversation.
Yeah, we had that conversation with another trainer, who wanted to let us know, actual terms, and I get it. So for the sake of this conversation, teaching dogs to learn what odor is and how to, let us know that the odor is there. Now, for you, as far as teaching a dog to understand new odors, what techniques are you using now? And if we asked you the same question 15 years ago, what would you have been doing then, and why did you change?
It's funny how you started that with terms, because this industry will never agree on terms. So that's the first thing we have to agree on, is that we will never agree. And it comes from a lens, right? It's how we see things. So certain trainers or scientists see that from their lens, and that was accepted vernacular in their world. And it's correct. Just as when someone says, like you said, imprinting can mean a lot of things to different people. Not that it's wrong, but somebody will say, well, from my perspective or where I come from or how this is defined, this is not the correct way. Okay, I can agree with you. But in our industry, most will use that term in the way that the joke I make is us knuckle draggers. We don't really care about where the origin of the definition came from. It just becomes part of our slang and the way that we talk. So to keep it in that realm and understanding that there'll be viewers and listeners that will be like, ooh, to me, that's not said correctly. Just understand we know that in other segments, the words that we may use may not match up with somebody else's. Doesn't mean we're right, doesn't mean they're wrong, or vice versa. Just means we're speaking the language that we all can kind of understand. And this audience is a very diverse and education audience. You'll have your ones that could be PhDs on here. You'll have ones that are first-time handlers. They've been on the road now 6 months, but they're going to regurgitate the words that their trainer used. So this is why just to kind of cover that. Circling back to your question of how or what's evolved, holy crap, it's even evolved in the past 6 months too. So I'll start off with kind of what you brought up. The initial way I used to do things was like everybody has done, still do to this day, which is I would take an odor and take a toy and either put them together or soak them or whatever it was. That's called pairing, or the technical term, simultaneous conditioning. You're putting two things together. And the pro was really quick connection. Dog goes, yep, I'm looking for my quote unquote toy, but this other stinky thing is here. And after X amount of reps, depending on the dog, some dogs connect to it quicker, some dogs don't. And you would get a dog that would understand that, but there would also be with everything pros and cons. We just dealt with the cons. Cons being dogs aggressing at an odor source because they've been either allowed to retrieve it before or because of the association with a toy and they're highly motivated for that toy. So to them, that odor means toy. And if you don't pay me fast, I'm going to do something to get this out. Because the previous, let's say 50, 60 repetitions before we made it, where we tried to build an indication in, we allowed the dog to probably self-retrieve, go get the thing or carry it or whatever it was with their mouth. And that was super helpful. It taught hunting really well, right? A lot of handlers or trainers would use the pairing method and hide it in the environment, and then some dogs were allowed to retrieve. Even the vendors, before you guys would even get them, vendors will do toy hunts.
Absolutely.
And the dogs hunting, if you make the connection to the dog, A equals B, hunting for something meant usually I retrieve it, which was their toy. Then we did the pairing. We said, okay, we bought the dog loves to hunt. We know it hunts for the toy. We said, okay, let's put the toy with the odor. And in various different ways. There's all we could go into a whole laundry list of variations of that. But what we had to start doing was managing them into getting into a position. So when I first did this, when I first got into detection dogs, 1993 or 4, and it was scratch alert. Like passive really wasn't a thing yet. And we'd go these big rock piles and we'd get like a parking stone and we'd put it on there and we'd dig a hole behind the parking stone and put the toy and the odor right there. And in the front of the parking stone, the dog wasn't allowed to go over it. The dog had to dig, and as they would dig, the rocks would fall and then the toy would fall out right behind it. That was our poor man's box that you see as we progress. And I like to kind of
priced, cheap, right?
Like you go out, go to our city fleet. So all that shit's already over there. So that was a big part of the life I had up until I went to the military. when I went into the military had started doing this passive sit response. And that was with cardboard boxes. You'd have, 4 cardboard-like boxes, and you did this very fixed ratio, go to the box, tell the dog to sit, throw the toy. And that was just how it went. And you'd get through it, and you'd manage it, and it was a lot of all about the indication and make the dog sit. The dog really didn't know what it was hunting for until it progressed, and then you stayed out of its way, and it would go down the boxes. There'd be something about this box in particular that was, the dog started understanding, okay, this box has relevancy to it. So I like to kind of, these days, as I've gotten older, make sure I give, credit where credit's due and understand the history of where we got to. So the scratch alert was like our 80s to 90s realm.
Yeah, I remember in that time they were saying if you were doing a passive alert, you're ruining that dog.
Your dog can't pinpoint.
Yeah.
Passive dogs, my dog will scratch right where odor's at. Those were the arguments I heard. Mm-hmm. Like, as I was the young handler at those days. So at my first, kind of going into passive alert dogs, I was forced into it because it was the military way. And I didn't even understand about bomb dogs at that time, as everything was just drug dogs.
Yep.
So aggressive alert drug dog was perfectly fine. Get on that car and scratch away and throw your toy in there. That was a good job. Who cares about their car?
Yeah.
Then passive started growing. Military said, well, we got bomb dogs. Bomb dogs is a big thing. So as I go in the military in the mid 90s, I was forced into it. I was forced into learning this passive alert stuff. And it, to me, was okay. It wasn't bad. It wasn't great. But I would say Kenny Licklider was, to me, that person that took us from the aggressive alert dogs, and we didn't understand passive well enough, took the military system, made it a little bit better, took it to wood boxes, did the ball drop box, which is you have the box with all the balls in it, you get them used to a box, and then you have a lid, now it's just with a port on it.
Yeah.
And then as soon as they come up to you, you pop the ball out of that really quick. And then he created a progression plan.
So, quick question: were they compulsing that sit?
Oh, 100%.
Boom.
Oh,
Like,
100%. You go up to a box, you better sit. So those dogs would just go to boxes and sit. And to this day, I will still see that method
I was
being
going to say
used
that's
in
still
some way.
pretty prevalent.
And then what's the byproduct of that? What have we done? And
Yes,
for our
dogs
listeners.
will focus to the handlers. Dogs
Yes.
will look for handler information or other cues, whatever the dog associates. So in this case, a lot of times, dog will see a box and go, that's relevant to me. I'm going to go to it, and I probably will sit. But the bigger thing is they're constantly looking at the handler.
So for our listeners, real quick, because I did this exact thing back in the day, and at the end of our handler classes, we had a high ratio of non-productive alerts.
Of course.
We had dogs just checking in with handlers and randomly sitting, and we're like, gosh, how are we going to fix this? And it was a real problem in the industry. And so go ahead.
And it's that problem still exists, but we understand there's more reasons now because we've gotten better. But like I was saying, so Kenny took us to that next level. It said, okay, here's how you can get a passive alert, and here's how you can get even better about it. It'll focus. And that was our first introduction in a large scale way of a passive indication with a stare. The problem goes back to that still had levels of we're going to make them sit. You're going to make them line up in the box. You're going to do all these different things that were part of that. It balanced out the right kind of dog. The dog was highly motivated. It was a double-edged sword on that one because he was really motivated, so they really want the ball. So they'll tolerate that pressure that you're putting on them to do this position. But they're motivated to pay attention to the box because the toy will come out of that box. And in those days, it was your hand that popped that toy out of the box. He had that little piece of rubber in the backside of the box that was like a tire inner tube. You reach your hand, that would keep the dog from pushing it all the time, but you can pop the toy out. Years go by, then we get the BSD, the ball delivery device. So then that comes out, and we're like, this is awesome. Now I can just hit a button, it pops a toy out. And before that, before the BSD existed, there was American Aluminum, which still exists today, makes all the car cages, right? They had a set of boxes that had this door that was just weighted. And then it was stainless steel, but aluminum box. But this one box was the hot box, and the door just weighted. It was wide. It was probably about 10 inches wide. But you could put food in there, you could put toy in there, you could put a tug in there. It held anything. But it was just a weighted door. So when you pressed a car door, like a car alarm button, it would pull the lock actuator. It was a car door lock. And that lock was being held by the pin. So when the lock released, the door just falls down. So the toy would fall out. So I'm training dogs. But every time you'd hit that button, you hear ka-chink, and then the door would open. Ka-chink. So every time that chink sound happened, the dog would be like freezing even harder. And I remember calling Kevin Sheldall one day, and I was like, man, if I could just replicate that noise that's happening in the box, and I could put it at a hide, man, I'd have dogs staring like you wouldn't believe. He goes, yeah, it's called a clicker. I was like, what? Like that pet dog stuff? Are you kidding me? That was the first moment I ever heard about marker, but I didn't know what a marker. It wasn't called a marker. It was just, he said, that's a clicker. And it was the first time that I could take something I knew.
But you were classically conditioning dogs at the time.
100%. Yeah. I was already doing it. Yeah. All of us were with our Velcro in our pockets and all the things that we were doing. We were inadvertently, we had created a technical term, condition reinforcer. And all that really means is a reinforcer is what you're rewarding the dog with. Conditioned means I've conditioned it to it. So if you go now back to Ivan Pavlov, classical conditioning, bell, food. So we under science that given us the path. You can create a sound that means imminent reward, and things happen because of that. So the rest of the dog training world was already, at this point, now we're in the 2000s, the rest of the dog training world had embraced markers, used it in many other ways.
Sure.
And even in the law enforcement world, we used it. So after Kenny comes Randy Hare. So Randy Hare comes in the picture and shows us reward location was important. Not just... Now, and Randy was a mixture of aggressive alert dogs or active alert dogs, heavy scratching because his boxes that he had were really designed for that active indication. And Randy was in the southeast kind of part of the United States. And we all kind of know the way law enforcement evolves is kind of like west, northeast, and then the rest of the countries will start to mold to whatever. So aggressive alert was still pretty popular in his segment, but he also saw the writing on the wall from my point of view, which was passive alert dogs were going. So he started just modifying his system to be for passive alert dogs. But the key that really blew him up was people were blown away that from the Kenny system where tennis balls were prevalent as a reward item, you didn't have tennis balls all over the floor because you'd have to be managing that dog. Randy took us that next step and said, hey, doesn't matter where the toy's at. Toys can be everywhere. The only place that dog gets the reinforcement is at the odor. And then you fight with him at the odor. Mm-hmm. And that was our next wave that kind of made even passive alert dogs stronger. And that was the first time trainers' brains started expanding outside of a compulsive way. It was still very strong, but we started realizing that I could teach the dog through teaching it that the toys on the ground or anywhere else don't mean anything. You need to find odor first. And when you find odor, then you get the reinforcement, or you get this game in a sense that he created.
And real quick, my understanding at the time, my issue, and maybe I misread it, was you're still aggressively playing at source, which could still, 100%. For some dogs now, 100%. Be aggressive at source.
Correct. A byproduct. I'm stealing this term from Dr. Hilliard now, fallout. The fallout from that idea was that some dogs that are highly motivated are going to demonstrate this active behavior in some way.
Yeah, I got my odor.
Yeah.
Where's
and I better get paid quick. Yeah. Right?
If not, I'm going to find my own toy or make my own toy.
In a controlled environment, a handler knows the answer. It's the boxes. I know that box. So you're quick at paying. Mm-hmm. So you didn't see the active behavior. You'd see it sometimes, but you didn't see it as much until you moved to that next level when you didn't know the answer anymore. And when you didn't know the answer, what happens to you? You don't reinforce right away because you're like, well,
are you sure?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Sure. And when that delay occurs, the dog's who's been on a vending machine system
explode, huh?
Means it's 1 for 1. If I go here, this better happen to me. And with enough repetitions, enough history, you're talking at this point, probably hundreds of repetitions that dogs had of going to an odor, getting reinforced quickly, to now, all of a sudden there's a delay because the handler doesn't know the information anymore. This delay, depending on the dog, so the higher motivated dog, the more it's apt to happen. The lower motivated the dog, the other issue happens, which is I'll walk away. Yeah. So we were starting to go, okay, we're seeing some things. Why is this occurring? And that led us, some of us, into asking people way smarter than us, how do you do this? Other than me controlling the dog or coming up with all of the different, what I call doggy magic tricks that we would come up with to get the dog convinced of this, or this. But every idea that we had created some type of fallout. There's always a pro and a con. So as I've evolved as a trainer, like you said, going back to how the whole question started, the system started with, once I kind of gone from the aggressive alert dogs to military passive alert dogs to learning from Kenny, this is a better way of doing passive. And I, like a lot of us trainers in the early 2000s, we copied Kenny's system as best we could. All of us would always add a little sprinkling of our own variation of this. Like it still happens to this day. But Kenny's system was probably the most tried and true based on number of dogs. Randy's came in and added a new flavor to it and added a new, like, to me, a wow factor that I could have the toy out. And I could do this with toys. It didn't matter. So
it was sexy.
It was sexy, boy.
Look at that Malinois, ignore all those balls and then hit
And
odor
do
and then
this.
get a tennis ball and pull, want to desire play with it.
Yeah.
How
So
do you do that,
So then we now hit the mid 2000s. So now we're getting like to 2010-ish. And Michael Ellis was coming onto the scene with markers. So back to the point you had made. So as I'm getting into becoming more detection focused, I see Michael's videos on markers. I thought to myself, I'm like, you know what? I think I could use that in detection. I didn't know how yet, but it made sense to me. And there's that thought back in my head when I said I reached out to Kevin Sheldall in the box making the click. I'm like, these things are starting now in my mind. It's like, what is it, The Beautiful Mind, where you have the dry erase board? So I'm like, there's something over here that makes sense to me. There's something over here that makes sense to me. How do they connect? And it was, I dated this girl from SeaWorld, and I was in San Antonio at the time. And she had watched us do the detection work. And first thing she asked me, she's like, why are you trying to throw a toy in so fast and all this kind of stuff? She's like, why don't you just use a condition reinforcer? And I'm like, what is this voodoo that you speak of?
Yeah, go back and play with your dolphins.
Exactly.
I got dogs to train.
This is the stuff I got to do. So
She's got no leash in the dog.
Yeah.
The dolphins going through rings of fire.
All kinds of stuff.
we're just
And I'm just trying to get a box to pop with a toy to come out of it, my dog to be good. So she humbled me in the sense of, like, when she changed a few conditions to me, like where I stood, because now the dog, how many of us have all seen, even to this day, a dog that goes to odor, indicates, let's say sit, because that's still most common, the dog will position its back towards you. Even if you're standing to your left, the dog will, or standing to your right, your dog will position its back towards your right, towards where you're at. So that way, it basically the dog's saying, I know you got to throw the ball over my head.
Yeah.
I know I'm not supposed to look at this.
Let me get into position
Let me
for
get in
you.
position to make this easier on you. So that tells you the dog has gamed it. So what she was doing is she would limit where I could be. And that was the first time that anybody ever limited where I could move. Even though the real world does that to us from time to time. But in training, I could control it. I could always walk behind my dog. I could get there.
Hey guys, if you're looking for equipment, supervisors out there, if you need equipment, go to Ray Allen, rayallen.com. They got collars, they got the muzzles, they got the harnesses, some of the best harnesses in the industry. They've got bite equipment, they got everything you need. Having been a supervisor, I know the importance of one-stop shop and not going to 7 different vendors. Ray Allen, that's going to be your one-stop, and all their stuff is excellent, and they're good people too. So it's a win-win. Also, we have a supervisor course coming up for you new supervisors or supervisors who have been doing it for a minute, have not been to a formal class. We got a 3-day class coming up in Elk Grove, April 28th, 29th, 30th. I do it with Bill Lewis. You can find this on my website. You can also find it on Bill Lewis's website, tacticalcanine.com. We're going to end this, probably put a lid on it at about 40, so please reach out to me, dtaccanine.com or trainers@dtaccanine.
Your position becomes relevant to the dog, which I knew but didn't know I'd manage that, because the dogs that got wise to me that would start spinning around and anticipating the reward being delivered to them, our corrective action was, well, just put 2 other people in the room and the other people have toys and they'll throw the toy for me. The dog will stop looking at me because there's a new magic show happening and there's 2 more magicians in the room and they all have toys
remember
too.
that game.
Yeah. And again, as I travel, I still see that as a common tool, and there's nothing wrong with it. But again, you got to think about what's the fallout, what comes from that idea. So anyhow, that forced me to go, ooh, there's another way of doing this. And that started my road of doing markers. I was still doing pairing. I was still putting reward and odor together. I would just say yes or free or whatever, and the toy would come out. And I was starting to go down that path. So I would say, technically speaking, as a trainer, that was probably the first method I used. I was a handler in the aggressive alert. I was a handler in the passive alert, like the Kenny version. And I was becoming a trainer between the Kenny's generation of trainers and the Randy Hare version of training. And that, like the version I called it, I said, Canine 1.0 was scratching, Detection 1.0 was scratching, 2.0 was Kenny, and then I called it 2.5, but Stuart Hilliard said, no, in his feeling, and I kind of agree with it when he said it this way, Randy's is a 3.0, because it was a significant shift from what we were doing. And that was worthy of its own category, not a half of a category. So markers is now what Stuart would call 4.0. And that's where we're kind of at today, where the prevalence of the use of markers and focusing on communication being clear to the dog, allowing the dog to make some mistakes within a controlled setting is where we're at now when it comes to detection. And so as a trainer, that was my evolution, but there was one more piece that took it to the next level, which was delayed conditioning, which was stop pairing, stop putting the toy and the odor together because the toy will always overshadow the odor. So that was the inherent bad idea or the fallout from pairing. So I was like, okay, this is what I need to do. I need to figure out how to do that better. Can I actually communicate clearer that odor is there? But I didn't know how. But in my mind, I'm like, if I can teach my dog to find a tennis ball, I can absolutely teach it an odor. But I get it. The odor to a tennis ball or to whatever the toy is, a Kong, etc., has value to it to the dog. It's perceived value. So, but how do I take something with no value and make it valuable? And I finally came across, it was actually hanging around Nathan Hall and Lucia Lazarowski from Auburn University. And what they had explained, they had a really good explanation of delayed conditioning. And Lucia created a slideshow that's still on my website to this day where you can learn like how she explains it. But they say the dog comes into odor first when the word they'll use is stimulus, being the odor. The dog comes into odor. There's just one thing there. When they're sniffing the odor, reinforcement happens. So the dog's mind, the pathway is odor leads to reward, not reward leads to odor, which was the old way.
Yeah, so real quick here, because Chris Oliver does my detection training. Patience of a saint, which you need in this
For
type
sure.
of program. So just so our listeners are clear, and I'll tell you the way we do it, which you tell me what I'm doing wrong. We Skinner box it.
Okay.
So it's a blank room with just a box. So for our listeners, we take out all the alternatives and the distractions. I want the dog to make the decision to put his nose in the box that has odor. Because if you look at, and what I've been told, the hierarchy of learning for a dog, if they can self-discover it, it's better than luring, but luring is better than physically manipulating, and physically manipulating is better than compulsing. So the gold standard is the dog figures it out on his own, and he convinces himself, so it's his idea. And so we put a box in a room with no other distractions. It has target odor. The dog meanders around. He eventually sticks his nose in this box. We've already introduced the clicker. He already understands that when the clicker goes off, he gets a treat or reward. A lot of times we pair this with food because we can mark food. Dog sticks his nose in there, click, treat, and then we sit back and let him figure out how that worked until he comes up with the idea, figures it out. We reward over a certain amount of time. And then once he has an understanding of that, maybe you start with 2 boxes. I'd be curious to hear what you do there. We have a box with no odor and a box with odor so that he can kind of figure out, it's not just the box, it's the odor. And then we start playing hide the box, and now he's searching for odor, and it's kind of in a passive type mindset.
Yep. So you hit a lot of things. So as we've evolved to what we call it step 4 or version 4, I should say, version 4 of detection. So we've now incorporated there's simultaneous conditioning and delayed conditioning, which is kind of what you're describing. How we are going about this is still evolving. I've even made switches in the past, like I said, 6 months, because so a lot of people ended up finding me in detection because I was the marker guy. I started off being lecturing on markers, and people at these conferences would be like, boy, you're nuts. You're telling that dog to leave odor, and you're going to pay it over here and not pay it there. There's something wrong with you. You're fundamentally broken if you're having that dog leave odor. And back to the conversations I would have with trainers about the use of a condition reinforcer, a lot of them would say, I don't do that clicker stuff. I don't do that marker thing. And I would just say to them, okay, let me ask you this, though. When you say no, nine, or phooey, what does your dog expect to have happen next? And they're like, it's going to get corrected.
Physical correction.
I said, okay, so that's a marker. You're just using it to mean a aversive. I'm using a marker that means a positive.
Which they were probably doing too with something like a good boy.
They absolutely were. It was just both were just inconsistent. But I said, so you don't disagree with the idea, you use it. You just don't understand it in this context. So let me just show you. And the ones that were open-minded were really good about going, oh, okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah, that does make sense. You're right. If I say no, nine, or fooey, my dog can predict there could be a correction. Doesn't mean there's always going to be one, but it predicts correction is next. Why don't I have a signal that predicts reward? And like you said, we did, but none of them were consistent. Yeah. Could be the Velcro in the pocket, could be the good boy, good girl, whatever it was. Those things would happen, but they weren't consistent. They weren't timed appropriately. Mm-hmm. But the no, nine, or fooey were generally timed.
Always spot on.
So as soon as I showed them that you do believe it, you just believe it in this way, just apply the same belief you have here, do it this way. And they were like, again, most were like, okay, I see what you're saying. That makes sense to me. How do I do it though? I've never done it that way. How do I do this right? So the use of the markers, and like you're saying, it started becoming the thing. So that was, and me and Jerry Bradshaw, we were friends, we had a debate for a while on the internet for about a year or so, because he was looking at it from the lens of this is free shaping, and there isn't a lot of development of hunting skills. And because of how I described it online and the ways I would share it, I wasn't ever talking about at those times the development I'd already done on the search skill stuff.
Okay.
I'd already done so as I grew as a trainer, I realized, like Kenny, I had to create like steps. In the detection community, we had some steps, but nothing that was like, here's 0, here's finish. We had some steps in the middle. We had like the box game, normal hides, and that was like where our steps were at, but it was still very vague. So step 0 is what I refer to as, this is where I develop everything. I teach my markers there. There's no odor. It's just teaching what a marker is. I do all the hunting games there. And the hunting I do based on the dog in front of me. Some dogs already love to hunt. They're already wired that way. Not a whole lot of hunting I have to do. If anything, it's usually get their skill set better. Like give them search technique. Like, I don't want you running around like a crazy dog. I want you to hunt with a purpose. And you're going to look for this. And then I would do it in different environments. So all those were preloaded. By the time
are they hunting for their toy at that point?
Most times hunting for toy or food, a reinforcer.
Okay.
And the reason for that is the dog's motivated for it.
Just to develop the skill of going out and finding something.
And for me, I would control the environment they searched in so they get better about searching versus just saying, here's this huge room or here's this huge place, go hunt until you find the toy. The old version we would do, and I still do a version of this, which is you would take a toy and like tease it up, hey, and you run around, you go. Mm-hmm. So what we kind of learned over time was certain dogs don't need the whole whoop it up kind of thing because that just throws them into insane mode.
Bonkers.
Yes, and then they don't hunt very productively.
Enter Cocker Spaniel.
Yes, yeah. and Spaniels and Mals come already kind of preloaded in motivation. What they're motivated for is slightly different, to your point. Spaniels are highly motivated to hunt. Mallies or herders are motivated to catch, to predation. They want to hunt for the thing, catch it, and have it in their mouth. A spaniel or most labs want to get it and then bring it to you or quickly move on to the next hunt.
Yeah, look what I've done. See you later.
Yes, let me go to the next one. Yeah. So we had to understand these things. And when that was a part of the system, we didn't have direction early on. So when we hit what I would call, like I said, the fourth variation of detection, version 4, we still had really gray areas. We had areas like we kind of mixed a lot of steps together and called it one. We would do hunting for odor, or we would do hunting for this, but we were shoving a lot of things together. And depending on the dog, you wouldn't know what the dog actually learned. Did the dog learn to hunt for odor, or was it hunting for a toy? Or was it learning to hunt and just go retrieve something? None of us know the answer until you work with that dog. That particular dog will tell you as you progress what they actually were learning. So what I wanted to do was really separate these things and say, let's build some skills. Let's build some hunting skills. Let's build some communication skills. Let's build some handler timing. Let's get handlers good at how to play. Oh, by the way, let's get it where your dog will out the toy to you before we get into detection. Versus choking the dog off of every rep effort for a toy. Because as most who've done this will tell you, wow, I get about 3 reps in it if I'm giving a toy.
Dog is gassed.
By rep 3.
Everybody's tired.
Yeah, I fought with a dog. The dog's been choked out 3 times. We're not gaining anything. So, but if I could prep this in step 0, when I finally go to odor, I've got a foundation now. The dog has a decent understanding of hunting, has a decent understanding of a conditioned reinforcer, and views me as a collaborator for the toy. Like, I give it to you, but you also give it back to me, and we play a game, but there's some rules to the game. So that's when I move into step 1, which is the odor recognition. I'm going to teach you odor. So here's the odor. It's the only thing here, which again, it's contained in something. Could be a PVC pipe, could be a box, could be a wall, whatever that people typically choose. And but the difference was it's the one thing and it's the only thing there. What I've learned is that can be helpful, but what I learned was one box for more than a couple reps just becomes a box game or a pipe game or
like
a wall.
A pointing game.
Yes, it's an operant game. Okay. I just do this behavior, and this behavior gets me. There's no odor connection to it yet. The evolution I made about 6 to 8 months ago was sitting down with Michael because I wasn't feeling good about how some dogs would do this game. Like some dogs get it, no problem. Some dogs struggled with, they'd just be operant. They would literally go to a box, put their nose over it, it wouldn't even breathe. They were just doing the behavior because that's what they learned.
Looked real convincing.
It looked
if
real
the odor was there, you're like, we got it.
Yeah, we had this false sense of like this dog's understanding odor. So what the evolution I made more recently is I immediately put 2 boxes out pretty quickly. Like if a dog only needs 1 box and they kind of go to it once or twice, I'm like, okay, you're good, you got it. Now you have 2. Pick the right one. And they had to go back and forth, and they start figuring out this one's different than this one. So like you said, 1 box has nothing in it. 1 box has the odor in it. And they'll quickly start realizing there's something different about this one. And they start paying attention to that. As far as the behavior goes, I'm not asking for anything other than just a natural, the sequence of predation for those that don't know it. So the dog hunts first, then it stalks, then it captures, kills, dissects, and eats it basically. So we use those concepts in a lot of what we do. We want chasing, so we want the dog to hunt something. Well, that comes out of a prey item, toy, food, whatever it is. And do I stimulate it? So in some cases, like I said, I'm hiding the toy around the room. The dog's stimulated by this. The prey instinct kicks in, and now it wants to go hunt, stalk. So the stalking phase is where you see that freeze come in. There's nothing we do as humans to tell the dog to freeze. In the predation aspect, the dog's like, ooh, I've been triggered. I want to catch that thing. So they stalk it first. That's just a natural biological thing that happens, which is why many handlers, as they've progressed in detection training, all see their dogs freeze, and they're like, that dumb bastard won't sit.
Yeah.
It knows what it's supposed to do. Dr. Hilliard...
Find it.
Yes. They will find it, they
Show
freeze.
Me.
Yeah.
Show me.
And handlers will wait and wait because they're saying, well, I can't reward the dog. The dog's not responding, not in his trained final response, which, again, like I said, most times is a sit. So then there's this standoff between the dog is going, I found it.
It's fucking right here.
It's right here. I'm so excited. I know the next thing is my toy. I forget what I was supposed to do next.
Bang. Sit.
So, yeah. So then what starts happening, but Dr. Hilliard gave me the information I had been looking for years. And it was about 6 months ago. He said, it's called Pavlovian interference. This is where Ivan Pavlov fucks you over with the idea that he trained you with, which was the stimulus, or in this case, the condition reinforcer equal this. So when this happens, the stimulus, in this case, it was the bell, predicted reward. So dogs started salivating. They can't control that, right? We all clearly understand that's how that works.
Yes.
In reverse, though, so using it in the detection standpoint, dog comes into odor, stimulus, goes, holy crap, I know what's next. I'm going to get a toy. So they cut the corner between odor equals a behavior equals a toy. Highly motivated dogs go odor toy. Because in the beginning, you've been very fast about paying. Sid has learned, here's what's physically happening to the dog that they cannot help. Tension. So when they get excited, what do all their muscles do in their body?
Freeze.
Lock up. Try to change your position when you're physically flexing your body.
Yeah.
This is why most dogs don't sit. It's not because they're disobedient. It's not because they're trying to screw you over. They're physiologically going, I found the thing. I'm so excited. My body's in tension, and I can't change positions. Along with hundreds and probably, I would say, thousands upon thousands of years of evolution that has told them,
Freeze.
Yes.
Let that thing move.
I'm going to, exactly. So you're trying to, so let me take it one more step. Take a pointer and make it sit. Don't get me wrong. TSA does this all the time. They do their best.
Yeah.
And many of them will tell you they still want to try to point. So you're fighting Mother Nature for an arbitrary human decision of sitting is relevant. What mandates a sit? Is there any legal thing that mandates that the dog must sit?
Matter of fact, I think is what we're seeing now is there's a mandate to not have final. We want to see him freeze up.
The fallout now has turned into the sit. Now there's enough experts out there. There's been enough history of the sit. It's been existing now for 20-something years that they're going, wait a second. You guys may be inducing this. The dog may go, I'll sit to get reinforcement. So when you're training detection dogs, you'll see a split. You'll see the dogs that lock up, who are like, holy shit, I found it. I can't do anything else but lock up. You got the other dogs that are like, oh, handler move. I saw your hand move. I'll sit. So what you want? I noticed what you want because you've hammered it into me.
Because we've been doing obedience long before anything else.
Not only that, but you've made me do this in so many other situations, and especially if there's a cute little box there, that's what I'm supposed to do.
I'm going to lean on that behavior.
Yeah. So, and again, when handlers know the answer, we will use some type of way to communicate to them that they should get in this position, whether it be waiting them out, physically manipulating them, or correcting them into what was a previously known behavior. The fallout from that idea is it has a lot of human connection to it. So like you were describing the process, the goal, we went from a system that was heavily human input, lots of handler information, to then we went, oh, handler information is bad. Don't get involved anymore. Stay out of the dog's way, let the dog figure it out. And not to get ahead of ourselves in the conversation, but one of the number one things I've seen in the industry that has changed is the old version of walking backwards, presenting every 12 inches is gone away. We've definitely left that world. But we turned into the world of I just stand in a doorway, do nothing because I don't want to interfere with the dog. Now they don't do anything and they don't get involved.
To the other, right?
Yeah, so the pendulum's now gone too far.
Yep.
We're starting to find our way back to a middle ground, which is, yes, scan then detail. And what we mean that detail is a strong word to some people, but what I'm trying to convey here is the dog can have free reign of the space, depending on the size of the space. Check this space within reason. But then I'm going to make sure what you have it sniffed on your own, I want you to sniff, just to make sure that we put nose to this.
Offer some suggestions, yeah.
Because if something was very low odor vapor, I want you to have a chance to smell it. But the history of training between the version 3 to version 4 was get dogs really excited, have them run around a space, find odor that's really easy to find, so it's low-hanging fruit. Dogs learn, oh, I can run around and be an idiot, but odor will hit me in the face if it's here because we made it strong enough. So they learn a really kind of sloppy search style. They will find it, but the real issue comes in when I take away handler knowledge and I start manipulating the odor itself, making it harder to find, trying to conceal it like a person who wants to not be found with it will do. Dogs all of a sudden don't know what to do with that, and they don't know how to search to solve that problem. And then the handler who doesn't want to get involved just stands there and goes, well, I don't know what I should do.
So everybody quits.
So there's a lot of confusion happening. Yeah. So the goal as like version 4 is progressing now is like, okay, be involved as little as possible, as much as necessary. What that is depends on the situation. I can't give you a percentage. It all depends. If your dog searches everything in the room by itself, I'm good with that. We can move on. I don't have to present anything. Where we kind of really lack is creating value in the beginning of the search. And this is a big thing I'm teaching now. About 30 to 40% of the time, there's a hide within the first 8 feet of the dog searching. Because I want them to know. In the beginning. Yes. Within the first 8 feet of your search, it is probable you could find something. And when they start buying into that, when you say search, they search immediately. Because
they don't run in and then just start running around.
And the reason why do they think about building search work?
We do the same thing, right?
Exactly.
We have a big building. Well, I got a big building. I'm going to put them in door 17.
Yeah, I want to see my dog search.
And that's what it's funny because we're in the basic handler class, and I was explaining to the guys, I'm like, we're going to search room 1, room 2, then he's going to be in room 3, then he's back to room 1. And it's just, if they can search 3 rooms thoroughly and back, and they believe they're in one of these on the front end,
5 and 6 will be fine.
5 and 6 are fine. 17 is fine. We don't want them down at 17 when we're at room 1.
The problem was we were doing that in odor. We kept putting odor out further, and because we want to see the dog search.
Sure.
We don't want to see it. What fun is that to us if they find it in the first 3 seconds?
We finally got a big building. Let's use it.
Yeah, let's do the whole thing. But again, the fallout was we have dogs who don't even start searching until X amount of distance goes by or time. Till they run into the space, depending on what the space is. Why do you think Vehicle searches, the dogs don't ever search the first 6 to 8 feet of where you start them from because you'd never put it there. It is always, so there's no, so then to make up for that, the answer is, oh, I do 150% search.
Yeah.
So I just go back around to that front that I know we missed.
That's great until you got to search 50 vehicles coming onto a base.
Correct.
Now we've just added another 25% onto the workload of the dog.
Yeah. So this is where the evolution is starting to happen. So as a trainer, I said, okay, I bought into delayed conditioning was the thing I liked the most. Odor has to be first, and then odor leads to reward. But the evolution I've had more recently is I still use simultaneous conditioning when I can now, because some dogs need that extra connection. Mm-hmm. They need something to create relevancy. Here's the secret sauce, for lack of a better term. There really is no such thing as secret sauce except for hard work. But the real thing is I use the minimal amount of reward odor I can and a larger amount of target odor for the least amount of time. So if I am going to do any kind of pairing, I'm going to use maybe a piece of the reward item that the dog likes, so Kong, ball, tug, whatever it is, and I'm going to put that with the odor for the shortest period of time. So it could be 3 or 4 reps, then I'm going to take it out, at least one of those reps, and the dog will probably, just because of habituation, go, oh, there's that smell. It smells stronger, but the toy is missing. But while they're doing that,
we're quick to market.
We capture and reward that. And every now and then, you might have to bring it back. I mean, as you guys probably saw, I just got done doing a detection dog school for LAPD and the agencies in that area. And this is what we went through. We showed, hey, some dogs are going to do it this way, and some dogs are going to do it this way. It's dictated by the dog. The best, people will ask me, I think you guys had it as a question, what system do I think is probably the better system? The best system for the dog.
Whatever we always say, train the dog.
Train the dog
right?
before
Like
you.
Because
Comes full circle.
Yeah, I may like delayed conditioning. I see the value. I see it's important. But what I need to know is, does it work for the dog? Yeah. And if it's not working for the dog, I need to switch. I need to find what works for the dog. So why I come into it now is I know in my detection toolbox that's right here is now no longer the Lowe's little small toolbox. I want that bench thing like back here, like this huge toolbox, because the more tools I have available to me allows me to, 1, connect to handlers, and 2, connect to more dogs if I have these tools available to me. I'm not rigid in like I used to be. I used to be fairly rigid to this is the way I wanted to do it. In the past 6 to 8 months, where I'm rigid to is results.
When you go into an agency like that, are you pre-requiring that they have a marker loaded, or are you starting off teaching like, so let's start the clicker?
You got it. So
using like your odor pays box or something like that?
Well, with the growth of condition reinforcers, a lot kind of knew the concept. And I'll just give you LAPD, for example. LAPD has 2 very distinct dog divisions. You have Metro, which is most of your patrol dogs, that now also have a secondary dog with them. Not all of them, but some of them have a secondary dog. That's for detection of firearms. You have G&D, the gang and narc unit, which has detection dogs that are going to be mostly narc, some gun, or actually a gun dog, and they have a gun dog now. The sergeant has a gun dog, but everything else is narc. But that side has never used markers. The other side had started to use markers a little bit, was learning it. But the cool thing was that the amazing thing about that trip down there with those guys is every single person in that room was open-minded. They may have had some preconceived notions, but I told everybody, the classes I teach now is we all going to have a conversation about what we see and what we think is working, and let's talk about an idea before we execute it. What's the good and what could potentially be the fallout or the bad or the con, and let's talk about it. And then, you know what? Sometimes you have to do this thing called fuck around and find out, which became kind of like a scary thing to do. But every single one, I know the 3 of us in this room, how many sessions have you just like, I'm just gonna go over here and just try some shit?
See what happens.
Yeah.
Yes.
Chris says we're gonna throw some spaghetti at the wall.
Yeah. Yes.
We're gonna figure this out.
Yes. Sometimes you need to do that. And I wanted people to now embrace FAFO. You have to do that sometimes. You have to try some
Especially
stuff.
if you don't know the foundation of the dog. Like if we get a dog from Eastern Europe, that's a different dog than we get from Holland, which is a different dog that we get from an American breeder.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
A bird dog is different than a Malinois. Like there's just so many, even Lab versus Springer, right?
Yes.
Springer's a flusher, Lab's a retriever. Like this one wants to work with you. That one wants to be out there. Like we're seeing a lot of changes that we have to make, like you said in the beginning, to please what the dog genetically kind of wants to do.
Correct. And it's critical. But if you take law enforcement is a very institutionalized system.
Oh, man.
You must pass it down. This is the way. Don't deviate from this.
Sure.
And if you do deviate too much, you're first will get a little slap on the hand. If you go again, you might get voted off the island.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of teams that are averse to trying something new, even though internally they feel what's happening with their dog isn't working. And they want help. So they seek out help, sometimes in the shadows, like shadows of Facebook. I'm an anonymous post. Please help me. I'm having this issue. They don't want to, or they're afraid to bring it up in their unit, because if they do bring up another idea, especially one they found either through a YouTube video or online or whatever, there's going to be some level of shun that will happen. Shun, you can't do this.
Yeah.
So the only time they get some empowerment is when, for me, what I see is when I show up to do a seminar, those are the ones that will start throwing some questions at me that are kind of outside the
They
normal
want you
questions.
to answer so their boss can hear it.
Correct.
Yeah.
So, and what I learned was, so, again, you guys have been with me long enough that I want to say probably the last podcast I did with you guys, I came at it pretty hard. I'm like, this is, I was passionate about the points I was trying to make. And what I've learned too, though there's some truth to that, I need to connect to a wider audience. And if I'm too rigid, or if I make the person or trainer feel defensive about their position, they won't want to engage a whole lot.
This episode is brought to you by INUKSHUK Professional Dog Food. There is only one brand of dog food that we use and recommend. That is INUKSHUK Professional Dog Food. INUKSHUK was created for working dogs and continues to be the top choice for all working dogs, from hunting dogs to sled dogs and, of course, police canines, whether it be detection or patrol canines. Visit INUKSHUKPro.com, or you can find all formulas on Chewy.com.
So now the whole new system so my seminar format now is called results-driven detection. I don't care what you do, how you do it. Let's just see how the outcome is. How does it work? I'll set some stuff up and let's see how this works. And then you guys give me the answers of why it worked and why maybe it didn't work. And we start seeing where some gaps exist. And then I push it back to them and say, well, how would you guys want to go? What do you guys feel comfortable with how to fix this? What is your first ideas? And they'll throw some ideas out and I'll say, okay, I like that idea, but what's something that may not be a good thing that comes from that idea? And they'll be like, oh, okay, yeah, I see that. Okay, so what's another one? Let's talk about another one. What's another idea? And that's how that's how all my 3-day seminars now pretty much run. And then I throw a camera on you. And not only does a dog do it, we all get to see it. This also increases more inclusion because right now, you know how detection is. No one can watch until you run.
Yeah.
And then, so now we set up things very differently. I'll get into that later on, but it's set up so that way people can watch and we get to review and we get to do an after action. And we talk about what works, what maybe didn't work. It could be just a one-off thing. Sometimes just because something happens doesn't mean that's an example I'll give is I put explosive training aids out in the same areas I put drug hides out. A lot of hunters won't run that. Why? Well, what if my dog alerts the other thing? Okay. Why would it?
Mm-hmm.
What's the reason why your dogs are going to alert to the explosive? If you're a narc dog and I put narc in the area, why do you think the dog would be alerting to narc? Did you train your dog? Did you train your dog on explosive if you're a narc dog? No. Okay. So then why? Think about this logically, but why? Why are you afraid that's going to happen?
Sure, I would be thinking like,
'Cause
well,
it's an
my human
anomaly.
odor might be there. Yeah, the anomaly odor might be
So
there.
so this leads me to what I call the cheat code. Every dog, we built this into them. We told them in the beginning, here's a cheat code that exists. So you kind of said part of it. The first thing is, it's the thing that doesn't belong here.
Yeah.
The dog's brain is wired to look for anomalies in the space. It's things that don't smell like they belong there to draw their attention. So we already tell them from day one, hey, this thing that smells different, like that one box with odor in and one box is not, there's an anomaly there. Pay attention to the anomaly. Second part that's critical is it's concealed in a way. It's not just laid on the floor.
Sure.
It's concealed.
It's in a place we would normally put something.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we've created a barrier. So it doesn't belong. It's concealed in a way. The third one's what you said. There's some type of known human scent. The trainer, the handler, whoever. The dog knows that scent. That scent, including rubber gloves, is in that spot.
And then other dog odor if you're not
Number
on
4,
number 1.
dog odor.
Yeah.
Because what happens is, why would I want to give a dog its own search area? Why not let every dog run the search area?
A lot quicker.
That never happens in reality.
Yeah.
Never in reality, I would say, in most disciplines are you going to have dog after dog run each other on the same hide. Would you ever have a bomb dog? Oh, no, hold on. Bring another bomb dog over. No. Let's bring 3 bomb dogs over to Vera. I've seen that happen in reality. It shouldn't happen.
Yeah, double
but
check
it does.
my work.
But how many drug handlers would allow, no, call the next drug dog. I know my dog didn't alert to the car, but let's bring the next dog up and see if he alerts to the car.
Sure.
So we don't do this in real stuff. But in training, we do. So we're telling the dog, the thing that doesn't belong, it's concealed. There's a human scent that I know that exists, a dog scent that I know that's probably from the group, or just another dog in general that's right there. And then number 5, handler behavior. Mm-hmm. The handlers react in some way or another that the dog knows is prediction to this. Number 6 happens to be the odor. We got to change that.
Pretty far down the list.
Yes.
Yeah.
So what I'm sharing in the training now is, okay, so what I teach in the class, how can we reduce the cheat code? Because we can't reduce everything. It's impossible to take everything out. But what can I do to make it clear that the odor is the important, relevant part here? There's some other things that are in the background that they may shift. So that starts off with, sometimes, like I said, it's a choice game. You have to choose, but there is an anomaly here, which would be the target odor.
In the beginning, that's hard to avoid, right?
You have to do that. That's going to exist. So that always exists. But what I can do is not run another dog over the exact same setup. So what we do, even in that very beginning stage, step 1, where there's 2 boxes to choose from, we take those boxes away and put different boxes in, and then so we call it the pit crew. There's a set of people who, after a dog runs, their whole job is to clean that whole entire kit while another kit goes down. Another 2 boxes go down.
What are you cleaning it with?
So we have 75% isopropyl alcohol wipes. So there's a video, if you go to my YouTube channel, I have Dr. Mallory DeShant cover all the different things and how to clean it. So it goes from like boiling things, like after a day of training, if I have a lot of cans I've used or things that need to be cleaned, get boiled and then that cleaned that way. But on the fly and in the pit crew version is HDPE boxes or PVC pipes. We will wipe those with the alcohol wipes. I also have a small portable air compressor, and I would usually blow that off to get anything off, and it dries it out really fast. So that's off the side in the pit crew, and the cans get changed out. So that way there's not a can with saliva all over it. There's already a new can. That aid goes into that one. It goes into, so I'm doing it requires work. It's not as easy as like, oh, just run their dog. No, you have a pit crew. They're cleaning. You have a new set that comes down, and you keep rotating through dogs that way. So right there, I'm able to reduce a dog part of that, which is a critical piece, because what does everybody's dog do the minute they get out of a car? Hit the ground, start sniffing for other dogs. Who's got pee mail for me around the area? So they're already using dog information. So if I want to make odor more prevalent, I have to do what I can to reduce other dog scent there. Mm-hmm. And then, as far as then, I change containers, because another part of that in the beginning stage is it's the container. So I only do the same container 2 days. So it's 2 days of boxes, then it'll be 2 days of pipes, then it'll be 2 days with something else, and then so it'll either be a wall or a wheel. And every couple of days, I'm changing what the odor is contained in. So that way I'm able to eliminate the outer container as a relevant aspect. So the dog goes, oh, okay, there's this. Here's something that's just, you guys podcast is the first. I haven't even shared it on my stuff at all.
Here we go. Here's an exclusive.
Yeah, exclusive. So
Skin and Radio
what has
exclusive.
been the number one thing that we've always used in detection? A box with a port, right? Single hole, whether it be a wall with a port or a box with a port, that's like the number one thing that we do. We've all seen it. The dogs go, boop, put a head in really fast, and they kind of shop around, but it's so quick. It doesn't require much sniffing to do it. And it was about 10 months ago, I was at Lackland, and I had already kind of played with an idea, which was, you guys have probably seen my video where I have my dog searching the PVC wall.
Yep.
And then more recently, I turned the PVC wall around. I showed I have
the backside with all the
the plastic
holes.
pegboard.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
What I was noticing was, personally, dogs, when they were sniffing things with multiple holes, sniffed a lot. So I had a box that I had designed with this guy in Holland. It's what we call the Odor Pays box. And all it was a box. I had multiple tools I could use. With one box, I could do multiple things. But one of the lids that he had was a multi-hole lid. So I decided one day to take the inner part of the box out that held the can, that has that little circle that holds the can in it. Mm-hmm. And then there's a lid that goes on top that has the port. I took all that out. And I took just the lid with all the holes in it, and I dropped the aid below that, which now meant I could have any kind of size aid I wanted, because if it could fit in the box, I could put that lid over it.
Sure.
I tried that. The dogs sniffed like crazy, because now there's 2 boxes with multiple holes, not just one hole.
So they had to work.
They had to sniff. That changed the game, 100%. So now I'm recommending. I have a video I'll be releasing soon, where I go over this. What I'm talking about right now is the problem with ports versus having multiple holes to sniff. Port does not increase sniffing. Port is just a behavior.
Allows for a check and go.
I stick my head in a hole, which is why you'll see some dogs, because they're so freaking excited to go search, to go find their thing, they just shove their head in a hole. And then they slow down after going up and down it 2 to 3 times, and then they'll go, okay, yeah, now I smell it. But you take away their ability to stick their head in a hole. So the wall I have now, even the wall that had all the toilet flange ports, I just went to Home Depot and got the plastic pegboard, cut it in squares, and put that over the ports. Now they go up to the wall. They slows them down, so they go to a natural pace, and they sniff. So there you go, everybody. What I'm recommending is it's a simple fix.
Yeah.
You just unscrew the lid that you currently have on the boxes if you're using boxes, take off the one with the port, go to Lowe's or Home Depot, get the plastic PVC pegboard, and screw that on top. Or just have it so you at least have one thumb screw, and you can spin it around so you can put stuff in it and put it back. Or just make a piece that fits inside the box. Here's another little hack. A friend of mine used door stoppers, like the back of a door that stops a door.
Yeah.
Just screw that in as legs, and that would fit inside the box, and it gives it height off the bottom. So that way the dog still puts his head into a box, but it's a square box, but it has to sniff inside. Because what I also learned is if you put the pegboard on top only, they still kind of go fast. But having a little bit of depth from the top of the box down, or a PVC pipe, the elbow pipe that everybody likes to use, I just go get the drain cap. I drill holes in it, and I have 2 ways. I can put the cap straight on flush, so it stays flush with the top of the PVC pipe, or turn it around, it falls in, it creates depth. But it's only an inch or 2 depth. That's all they really need. They just need to go in and they sniff. I'm telling you, like I said, we're talking about it now. You just make that one change to your current box, pipes, or wall. Put multiple port or multiple hole type of cover to it, whether it be the pegboard. Don't use the fiber pegboard with the white on the one side. It's fiber on the other side. That fiber absorbs even better than cardboard.
Suck up all day.
You can get the plastic super easy. You can buy it on Amazon. You can buy it at Lowe's. You can buy it at Home Depot. You just got to look for it. You got to ask for it. Sometimes it's not as easy.
That was
to
on.
find.
You had that on Instagram last
Yes.
week, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Cameron, is this detection 5.0 we're talking about here?
No, we're still in 4. We're still in 4. This is just the evolution because 4 is so new.
Yeah, it's
we're just evolving.
4.2.
Yeah.
Okay.
Going down our list, we covered a lot of things in there. We jumped around. There's a couple that we missed. I'm going to go back to what was 3 on our list, which is pseudo.
Yes.
You can talk about brands if you want to talk about brands, but all of us, we started with pseudo. I know you were using pseudo at some point. There's a lot of concern about pseudo. There's a lot of conversation about pseudo. The scientists got involved with some pseudo and cleared some things up. There's some other companies out there that are doing soaks with actual odor. Where are you at with training aids that aren't a pound of cocaine in your hand, right?
So let's go to the history again. So before pseudo existed, all we had was real, right? Whatever we get our hands on.
Right.
And that varied. And to this day, that's still true.
Some brown cocaine that was 25 years old and had been.
I've gone to agencies and you look like this is what you could train with, but that's what they have, right? So what we knew is we were given training aids, and certain training aids required licensing. So explosive narcotics required licensing. And as the detection dog element grew, especially after 9/11, that meant a lot more civilians came into the market. Certain civilians could not obtain licensing for any number of reasons. Could be just their location. Their location was crappy. They couldn't get a license because they're too close to train tracks or whatever it was. So how do we solve that problem? If I can't get my hands on real, what can I use? Well, the U.S. Customs were the first to be using a pseudo created by their chemists. It was a pseudo cocaine. It was basically what theirs was for safety purposes. So they could be doing the towel throws, tying the little pouch of the pseudo powder to the towel. They would throw that in the field. And the dog would run for it, grab it, bring it back. So that was our introduction to pseudo. Sigma was a company that came along and kind of had the main thing for a long time. They kind of focused heavily towards the human remains side. I know they were popular in that region more, but it was problematic. It still had pros and cons, a lot of pros and cons to it. The narc side was also somewhat problematic, but it solved a problem, basically. That's the biggest thing. Is it solved a problem that we all had in that realm of time, which was, if I can't get my hands on real, how do I train my dog?
I don't want to carry a dead body in the trunk.
Yeah.
They start asking questions.
There's all kinds of stuff,
all
right?
kinds of problems.
So people we're in a what's it call it? not commercial market, but yeah, basically we're when there's a need, we come up with something. Capitalism, thanks.
Yeah.
It's a capitalistic market. So we come up with, hey, I have to solve a problem. Scientists, companies, etc., started cropping up with their versions of pseudos. Are all pseudos created equal? No, they're all based on whoever that chemist or scientist is who creates it. That filled that gap that we needed for quite some time. Now we have a third category that exists, which is called SOAKs, which is your get sent tube, spelled GETXENT. A lot of people call it get exempt, or they have a lot of different names for it, but the way it's pronounced is get sent. And what that is a polymer designed to absorb odor. Okay. Is it as perfect as having the substance? Not exactly, but it is the closest thing that you can have, that you can possess without any licensing, that will have the odor. I think in detection, we all can agree your dog is not trained to the substance. Your dog is trained to detect the odor of the substance. So now we have a tool that exists that will absorb the odor through a scientifically designed way. Now, can the scientists all debate with each other on the design and how well of this and this polymer? That's their thing. But what we do know, based on even all the scientists will say, let the dog tell you. Okay. Well, what I can tell you is, and with now various tests that have occurred by the US government and other private entities, that when tested real, the pseudos, and now the absorptions, your real and absorptions have the closest connection to consistency. If I teach the dog this, it will find this. It's not guaranteed, okay? People want guarantees. It's a closer connection when tests were run blind. Dogs trained on SOAKs alerted to the real substances in blind lineups more consistently and frequently than dogs that were trained with the pseudos. What the pseudos really did, and the truly amazing thing about pseudos, is it allows you to train a dog to find an odor and do its thing, whatever the train find response is, to something that you're probably never going to find in the real world environment anyway, because that formulation of what that chemist made of that pseudo is unique in its own way. Now, could there be other chemicals in there? That's an argument that I'll let the chemist do. But what I can say is it's like having what we call now novel odor training aid, a NODA, which is its own chemical, which is used for the vendor side of things.
We love it.
When you don't know what you're going to train the dog to do, bomb or drug, train the dog on NODA. Technically, we could grab a pseudo and almost do the same thing, because that pseudo formulation
You're probably not going to find anywhere else.
is not
either.
going to, other than other civilians who might carry pseudos with them.
I think the one thing, and I think we all dealt with this, I can walk in a room. Again, we won't talk about the brands, but I can walk to a room and be like, holy shit, there's a pseudo in this room.
There's some that are very powerful in the odor in which they emit. And there's lots of reasons the scientists or the researchers who've studied that will give you why it's happening. I'm not going to get that conversation because that's their conversation.
Yeah.
I'm looking at it as a trainer. So like you, I got into, when I first started using it, I was like, this works. It did fill that gap I needed. Mm-hmm. Here's where my belief was finally shaken in what I was doing. Remember that cheat code I was telling you about earlier? Mm-hmm. So instead of putting odor there, just put in whatever. So the reason why, put in pseudo. So the reason why I believed the pseudo led my dog to finding real, because it was set up the exact same way.
One of the other six
Back
factors.
to the whole thing of why
Sure.
or drug dog handlers don't want to train with a bomb hideout is because it's novel. It doesn't belong. It's the only thing there. After I've run a dog or two on
Behavior.
it, so the dog could generalize very easily, because what most would do when you would train from a pseudo to real was when you went to real, you put real out with a very easy hide. It didn't do anything complicated at first because it's your first time exposing the dog to it. So the dog goes, oh, the cheat code. Well, this thing doesn't belong here. It does this. They acknowledged it in some way. Some dogs may full on responded. Other dogs may have acknowledged it, maybe moved on with a little bit of help from the handler, said this is relevant to me now. So the dog ends up learning the pseudo odors along with the real odors. They're just now a longer list of odors. When it was tested blindly, meaning that they did lineups where the handler only could see letters or numbers on cans, when they'd have a pseudo in there, a real in there, and then a blank in there, like no odor at all, along with distracting or proofing odors lined up randomly in there, is where, if you look at the research, shows there's a disconnect between what some dogs, many dogs, are connecting. Now, What the science side, let's say the science of the pseudo side of it would say is, well, that's a training problem. The trainers screwed that up. That's why that happened. But this has been run now enough times with enough different agencies and enough different dogs that there is a consistency. Now, believe me, there's going to be plenty of people that, just like myself, that will say, Cameron, I've used it all the time. It works. And I totally agree with you because I did and believe the same thing. What I now understand is if I have a cleaner path to get there, I'm going to choose the cleaner path.
And the cleaner path being
sticking to what I can test matches what I'm looking for.
Yes. So for handlers, right? Okay, so they actually have dope or explosives or a soak.
Yep.
Those are probably going to be our top 8, correctly?
Yeah,
Correct?
so right now, because now we've evolved, now that there's 3 options that exist, and the soaks can also be tested, so you know the purity level of it, you know what's in there. Like I said, there will be arguments that will go into the deep in the weeds on the scientific side of things. We're dog handlers right now, and everybody who's in there, we're not chemists, and a lot of us. I'm not a chemist. I don't claim to be a chemist. I look at stuff, I read it, I make my own assumptions and proof answers that I've gone through to formulate my standing point on this. But what I say now is, if you can't get your hands on stuff, there's nothing wrong with using a pseudo. Just don't go into it with the assumption that the pseudo will automatically one-for-one lead you to the other one.
Correct.
Just understand that there's going to be, to the point you made, strong smells that may draw their attention.
But I'm a trainer, handler, and I get to choose a couple.
Yep.
In order, would you say substance, soak, pseudo?
Yep.
Kind of in that order.
That's how I would run it for me personally, just because
Me too.
of what I have available to me now. Now let's bring into the common downsides to the soaks. The first number one thing is when teams first run it, their dogs will use. I've had a lot of dogs walk it at first. Not every dog, but I would say a decent percentage, probably more than 50%. I had to look into why. Why is that happening? If this is the substance, why are they walking it? Well, Dr. Nathan Hall's research separately had nothing to do with pseudos, reals, or anything like that. He was studying volumes of odor. And did dogs get used to a volume of odor, meaning their training kit size? So if your training kit goes from, let's say, 0.2 grams to, let's say, 48 grams, I would say is a typical kit size for a lot of teams. Some don't even go down that low. Some will go 2 grams to 48 grams. But whatever your size is, the kit that you have that you train with commonly, your dog will get very good at that odor range. When you go up by 10 or down by 10, Nathan's research showed that he dropped into single-digit percentage accuracy until reinforced.
Okay.
As soon as they were shown that this is relevant, even though it's not the same volume of odor, higher or lower, once you get reinforced for that, then you'll pay attention to it. So when the team, they first get a get sent to from Precision Explosives that smells like whatever the training aid is, and they put it out, they're like, it sucks, my dog walked by it. The product isn't the faulty part. Our training that exposed the dog to that low amount of odor is where our culprit lies most times. The dogs haven't gotten down to that low volume of odor before. Here's an easy fix. If you want to first introduce it, put multiple tubes out together. Put 4 out together. And you're going to see a better acknowledgement now because more odor is available.
And then would you say maybe let it set longer?
You can let it set longer. This will then starts getting into type of substance in my environments. So those things can kind of dictate some weird stuff that might happen.
Okay.
That won't be a consistent.
All right.
So that's why
I've added another variable.
Yes. And
Okay.
that's the thing that we have to always pay attention to in detection is if I introduce a new variable, what does it change? And what might it introduce or take away from what I've been doing? Okay. We don't give that enough consideration. And that's the crux of a lot of issues is because we didn't look at it and go, oh, that idea on the surface looks like a great idea.
Yeah.
Downside, what I just did was
I've
X.
changed it.
Yeah.
I've changed this equation.
Yes, exactly.
They with the get sent tubes, I don't know if you know the answer to this. If I leave my get sent tube out in an area that's odory,
Yep.
If I put my get sent tube in the butcher area of the grocery store, is it going to then soak in a fair amount of meat odor? And now I have a get sent tube that's loaded with meat odor and
Yes.
and explosive odor.
Great question. And I'll plug the podcast episode I did on Canines Talking Sense with Gregory, who's basically the co-creator of the Get Sent tubes and then how to do it. So the answer is it could be, and here's why it could be. So if you buy the tubes that are already pre-soaked, they've been soaking for hundreds of hours. So the polymer is not maxed out, but it's pretty well.
Kind of full. It's like a sponge. It's
exact.
full.
Correct. That's a great analogy. That's the one I use a lot of time too. Is it's like a sponge. If I put a clean, dry sponge into water, it's only going to hold so much water. I put it in a full sink of water and take it out. It can only hold the max, right? So what they do when you buy the tubes, it's been soaking for a period of time. So I want to say, don't hold me to it, but I want to say it's 150 hours is what they say it's been soaking for. That's a significant period of time, right? So which leads to the second question we get all the time when it comes to soaks. How do I write this down in my records? How do I equate that to a number? 5 grams, 10 grams. So how do I make that? And what he says is, problem is we're not looking at odor the way it should be looked at, meaning weight has nothing to do with how much odor something has. There's 2 parts of odor, which he shares in the podcast. There's the particulates, which is the things that you hold your flashlight up in the air, you can see things going across. That's how you know which way the wind's blowing sometimes, like the old cop trick.
Yeah.
Hold it, okay, the wind's going that way. So that's particulates, right? And particulates come off of substances. Molecular levels of odor, which is what the get scent tubes are doing. They're actually absorbing the molecules, okay? So I'm regurgitating what, as Gregory will explain it, it's absorbing the molecules. You can get a lot of molecular weight in something very small, and it releases. So it's basically, that's how the polymer is designed, is to absorb and release at a rate. That's the magic to the tube, is it's a polymer designed to absorb and to release controlled. That's why cotton balls work great. We've all used cotton balls, gauze pads. We've all used, I think people have tried to use stickers. I've seen a lot of printer labels, Wattman paper. So all of those things are absorption, right? The difference between those and a get scent tube is the get scent tube was designed to absorb and release at a certain rate. That's what makes it different than a cotton ball. So again, Nathan Hall did a study, and these are all things people can look up. They can go read for themselves. That the study that he showed was, yes, he actually used t-shirt material, gauze, cotton ball, let's say a piece of metal, and then get scent tube. There's probably one other thing there too. But what he saw was that the cotton ball gave off a lot of odor really well, especially when you first put it out. I think it was the strongest. I think that and t-shirt material was like the strongest that put out odor. It also dies off the fastest.
I was going to say it's off-gassed really quick.
Yes, it goes away. And those of us that have used this know this by default. Like, man, they're not finding that. Like, Sixth dog isn't finding that cotton ball anymore like the other dogs did. So what he shares is, okay, so this is cheap. You can go buy this. But what are the downfalls to the cotton ball? 1, dissipates the odor very quickly. 2, cotton balls aren't sterile.
Yeah,
they're gonna bring in something. So that means I then have to put cotton balls out that aren't with odor on them. Same with anything else in that list. Get scent tube, like he shows, lasts the longest. So when they compared it time-wise, how long it lasted for, the get scent tubes beat everything out for how long they still emitted odor. So that was critical in an aspect of longevity. But in the beginning, when you put a cotton ball versus a get scent tube out, the dogs were banging the cotton ball because it would put out more odor. This puts out the odor in a very controlled way, but usually a lower threshold, which is, the easy answer is just put out more get scent tubes if you need more odor. Now, where it runs into the weird part for us detection dog people is people don't buy get scent tubes always loaded with odor. Sometimes they buy them blank and they want to put in their own, they want to load it themselves. So a lot of teams have purchased get scent tubes with no odor in them. There's blank tubes and they will stick them with their substance. Now, unless you were keeping track of the time, you don't know how long it's for. So back to the answer to your question. So the why he said, yes, it could absorb the things in the other space, but what he wants you to understand is if you've been soaking that tube for, let's say, any amount of, let's just call it hours of time, when you go put that tube in a spot with some other stuff, yes, it's absorbing the odor, but it's not emitting it like the other stuff is being emitted right now. The thing that's been soaked first is now emitting.
Push out the hardest.
Gotcha.
But if you have it sit there for 2 hours to run all your dogs, that tube will now have the target odor that's now dissipated to a certain level, mixed in with this other odor that you have it there. But I can't call it the correct way to fix that because it's not scientifically what they would say to do. But then you can take that tube and put it back with your substance. Mm-hmm. And you may be, the fear would be, okay, am I introducing this contamination? Yeah, but at a very low level. And then you're reabsorbing that tube with the target material again. Is it a clear picture? No. Does it make your target odor dirty? In a sense, yes, but target odor is
Same
always
thing
dirty.
we're going to have if
Yeah.
we put
You got
actual
it.
substance in.
100%.
You're not going to find perfect. You're looking for good.
Yes.
If we put the Get-Zen tube in a TAD in that same situation, there is no absorption.
And let me add this thing that they already do. What is everybody's odors usually packaged in? Some type of canvas bag,
Oh, yeah.
plastic bag, nylon bag, right?
Yep.
That nylon or canvas bag is absorbing, if not sometimes even better than a Get-Sent tube is in that environment. So the fear, because we introduced something new that was magical, a tube that could do this thing of absorbing odor and putting it out, we were like, ooh, this is weird, this is magic to us, like Pseudo was initially. We said, but what about this fear? What about that fear and that fear? It's the same fear, but you didn't pay attention to it when it was all of a sudden,
Sure.
when it was a canvas bag.
Yeah.
You're like, canvas bags are fine. Even though they're the most absorbing. Everybody who's used canvas bags, after your third time using it, it's got stains on it. It's got dirt and crap on it. And what do? You throw it right back in your can. You close it up. You throw it in your trunk of your car. So you can't come at me going, I'm so concerned about contamination when I can look at your kit and go, clearly you're not worried about contamination.
Unless you're switching it out every single time.
Yeah, and
and
we
then you're
know-
handling it with tongs and the PD. And,
And here's-
like, at a certain point, you
Yeah.
just have to.
But here's
you
what I
just
tell
have to push
everybody,
forward.
because I came from, again, I got hyper concerned about odor hygiene, but we all know the real world's a real world, and it's a dirty motherfucker. And what I want my dog to understand is if this chemical is here, regardless of the contaminants around it, tell me. If the other contaminants that are mixed in with whatever aid I have that aren't relevant, I'm proofing against those to make sure my dog understands that that's not what I want you to look for. It's this. And here's the hook that, again, is another little exclusive for you guys. Nathan Hall shared it with me. When I asked him the question, if I'm training my dog on, let's say, cocaine or let's say, explosive odor, whatever the package I typically have is, I start with is, let's say, 5 grams on average. How soon should I change that out to a different cocaine, like somebody else's kit or a different volume? Like in my mind, I was treating it like training where I would wait probably a week, maybe more, before I do another version of that. He was like the next day.
as often as possible. I
Yeah,
assume.
because his point being is the more variables you show that dog of the target material, the better they get the target material.
generalize
If you keep showing them the same picture over and over and over again, they'll get really good to that picture. And the minute you show a variation, some dogs generalize well, a lot of dogs don't. So some dogs will go, smells like it. And everybody who's done this long enough has seen that. We've all seen that. We just didn't know really the why, but we've seen it. And we would address it in whatever way we could to get the dog to understand it. Versus going, you know what we should do is show them another version of this again and again. And every couple of days, it's a new version of the same chemical, just packaged a different way. Like it's your kit, not his kit.
Yep.
And the sooner you do that, your dog becomes flexible in its odor, let's say deposit or the odor memory of this thing smells like this, but it also has some of these other things that aren't relevant to me, but I know this one is relevant. This one's been consistent every time I've been paid. It takes them a while. You got to give them examples to learn it.
Yeah.
That's how you do it.
I think that takes us into this question.
So, fentanyl's a hot topic.
Yep.
So, is this something you're seeing nationwide now?
100%.
That we're conditioning to.
Yes. And specifically, because I travel worldwide, United States is the main one. Like Australia hasn't had to deal with fentanyl really yet. I'm sure it's like them. It's going to be like it was for us. It's there. They just they're not seeing it enough yet to know it's a problem until
They
it's
don't
a
have a
problem.
Mexican border.
Yeah.
They have it, but they're close to China. They have a huge Indonesian kind of sphere of influence. But anyway, so the United States, it's extremely common. And what we used to be pushed away, like dog handlers would be like, nope, we're not training on fentanyl for all the obvious reasons, is now you're training on fentanyl.
Yeah, you have to.
Yeah.
And how are you seeing it used as a training aid form?
So the first accepted version that became popularized was the Get Sent tube from Precision Explosives that was impregnated with the fentanyl. And that was a safe way and a way to introduce the fentanyl odor controlled. And it started at a low volume of odor, which was good. The thing that started coming from that now now certifications can be run, right? So now you can have organizations get the tubes, put those out in the environment as an odor, and it's safe. And the dogs should be hitting on it if they're going to be trained on fentanyl. The fentanyl itself as a training aid that's where it gets hairy. That's where I have units that have their own fentanyl training aids in the powder forms or pill forms, and they utilize it very carefully. It's packaged safely. So then it begs the question on my end is I would want a chemist to tell me like how much fentanyl odor is getting out of this packaging, because different units have had different ways of doing it, but it's been safe and they've been successfully training dogs on it. The reality mixed in with all that is dogs in the field have been self-imprinting on fentanyl without the handlers ever knowing it. So the U.S. Border Patrol, and I can only speak a little bit about it because I don't know all the details on it, but Matt Devaney from Border Patrol has been studying that phenomenon within the Border Patrol program with their dogs. So the first thing was, have our dogs been self-imprinting on fentanyl because of the border? Turns out, yep. There have been plenty of dogs that when they put up a lineup with only fentanyl in it, there were dogs that were banging it. So then that answered that question. Like, yes, it was happening.
Well, it made it easy.
Yes. So then it was like, okay, let's purposely train for it so then we have better success in the field for finding it. And in that is right now where this is a part I'm not as familiar with, but they know there's two forms of fentanyl that are popular, which is fentanyl HCl, which is the most popular one, and fentanyl citrate, which is usually the liquid one, if I remember it correctly. So they don't necessarily smell the same. Yes, the chemical is there, but to the dog, there's differences. So until you expose a dog to these differences, the HCl is probably going to be the one that's the most popular, that's the pill and the powder and things like that. But your citrate, which is now gaining in popularity, depending on what regions and so forth, what hurdles they have to deal with it when smuggling it in, is what is now another thing that might have to be added to get consistency. We can't make the assumption, and here's the exact point why I don't make the assumption. How many people have cocaine HCl and cocaine base to train with?
Not many.
Yeah. So you had a lot of crack back in the day. Yeah, back in the day when we always had cocaine HCl and cocaine base because in my area, crack was huge. So we needed the cocaine base to train on a lot because we couldn't make the assumption that the cocaine HCl, and we were right. It didn't always make the jump.
Crossover.
Yep. And again, back to Nathan Hall's point, you have to show diversity. You have to show the dog this target can be in a lot of different forms, but if I only show you two forms, but I expect you to find it in all these other forms, it's not going to be there. So fentanyl, now, I would recommend agencies, probably your most logical way would be the safest way is to get the tubes that are already impregnated with the odor on it. You know the percentage. They'll give you a printout of what the percentage is, the purity level, which is usually a high 90s, and you can start there. If you get somebody who's got a safe training aid to work with, you can expose a dog to that. Don't assume that get sent tube that you were using will automatically bleed over because right now we're talking high purity level of the get sent tube at a lower level of odor to maybe somebody who's got a training aid that has maybe only 70% pure with a lot of other contaminants that could smell different. But what you want to do is set up in a controlled way the very first time you introduce it and reinforce a dog for that so they understand that, oh, okay, this is relevant.
This is that, is that. Yep.
You got it.
Yep.
And again, that goes back to the whole pseudo thing. This is why pseudos work because it did make that jump for us. It wasn't that it was a 1-for-1, like this smell equaled that smell. It taught them odor.
Kind of a
taught them the
pathway.
game.
Sure.
Yes, it taught them how to speak the language of detection.
Cameron, we've gone over a lot. I
Yep.
got one quick lightning round.
Yes.
I'm going to limit you to one sentence.
Perfect.
No hyphen, no semicolon, just like a.
Yep.
You're a wealth of knowledge. I do appreciate your time because this has been great. Gloves or no gloves when you're putting out odors?
I don't use gloves sometimes, and sometimes I use gloves.
Okay. Number one mistake you see handlers making out there?
It's not your job to convince the dog there's odor there. It's the dog's job to convince you there's odor there.
Number one mistake trainers are making out there?
You're not patient enough.
Amen to that. When starting out with an odor, are we starting out with a big odor or a small odor?
Great question. Low to moderate.
And when should handlers be switching out their training aids?
So this is a chemical dependent. So not all training aids age equally. So, but to prevent a multiple answer kind of thing, yearly is still the best answer.
If add on that, if everybody's going get Zent, what is the prescribed time period to trade those out?
Yep.
Because I mean, it seems like that should be the path. We have an actual odor.
Yes.
It's imprinted in this soak. Now we have the soak. Everybody should be going. How often should you be?
So the easy answer to that, again, I'm regurgitating what they told me. So let's just say if the 150 hours was correct, if I remember that correctly, then it will last for 150 hours. So every time you put it out, what you're doing is you're writing down the time that you used it for. So when you first get that brand new tube, so this is what you're writing down. So this is that answer that question earlier when handlers are like, well, how do I document the tube? How do I document it in weight? Well, I document it by the time. So this is a get sent tube that I put out that is 150 hours soaked. The next time I put it out, I'd say if I train for 3 hours, this is a get sent tube, cocaine, 147 hours. 3 hours next time, it goes down to 100, it go down to 144 hours. And you keep going, you keep deducing or reducing the time, because then that's going to tell you it's not as strong, not as strong, not as strong, not as strong, not as strong. The other key thing that I made a mistake on when storing it, store it in a tiny little vial. Don't stick a small get sent tube in a big glass jar.
Because it's going to gas out into
You got it. It's all that they call it headspace. All that air in there is going to deteriorate it faster. So a little glass vial, which they sell with those apparently. I didn't know that either. But you can buy the little vials, and I could be wrong. Maybe Todd Wilbur is now adding that into the packaging.
He actually agreed to come on the podcast next time. So it'll actually be perfect. We'll be able to top this conversation with that conversation.
Yeah. So he'll fill in a little bit more of the particulars when it comes to that. But I can tell you that the small glass vials are better than the glass jar for the get sent tubes. So that's a relevant point that keeps it in that stronger aspect longer. But anything you use, you're calculating time, because that what I was saying earlier, the molecular, all that kind of stuff was based on time. The longer, the more molecules can add, and that's again, I'm not going to try to get too sciencey with it, but just know it's a time related thing more than anything else.
Last question.
Yeah.
If people can't figure it out, where can they find you? Where do you want people looking for your stuff at? The good thing for us is you're close to our zip code now, which is really cool.
Only a couple hours away.
I assume we'll be doing this again.
Yeah, for sure. I have to have you guys up to mine, so you guys can come to the studio down there too. Easiest place is fordk9.com, FORDK9.com. You can, the website's we're now heavily educational based website. There's probably 50 plus webinars on there. I have now step 0, what I was talking about earlier, the foundational stuff. I have that whole video series where it's myself and Michael Ellis teaching along with my other trainer, Natalie, all those beginning steps before you get to odor. There's 6 lessons in that one. I have videos with other trainers. Like I have Nathan Hall as a researcher on there, or as a professor, Paula Tiedemann, and then Simon Prinz has a video I have on there from him lecturing. I've made that location, I wanted to make it a one-stop shop for people to go to see classes, but then also in person is important to me, which is why, as I've tried to evolve as a trainer, as you guys already know, I do this seminar circuit from time to time. I do less of it now as far as like the big organizations, because I've done those for a lot of years. I think it's a place for newer trainers to get their time. And it helps me, but it doesn't help me like it used to when I was new. I needed that. Now most people have heard my name, so me only having 2 hours to talk about something kind of in depth doesn't help me a lot. Yeah. It may cause more confusion. But what I try to do is go in person to these agencies, and this is where now I am doing either a 3-day, like I said, results-driven kind of seminar, or one I call now symptoms and remedies, which is where we identify what the problems are, what are our symptoms, and let's create remedies to fix these things.
Well, I think we know firsthand. So Chris works for you. Kylie works for me. Chris does all your detection, Ford Disciple. Kylie works for me, starts all of our dogs, Ford Disciple.
And she's coming out and training with me now
Now
too.
she's training for you now.
Yeah.
We've seen the progression, and we were towel guys and BSD guys and did all that same stuff. We see the progression. I see the value in the dogs. The dogs are coming out bangers. We didn't get into the talk about, so that'll be the next conversation, breeds and those kind of things. I think some of the dogs we thought were shit hot. We're like, maybe there's some flaws there, but we'll talk about that at another time. But we definitely see that the system works, and the dogs are more thorough and less involved with the handler, which is what we really like to see, where the dog's like, get out of my fucking way, let me work. So the product speaks for itself.
Supervisors, handlers, we send guys to different states, different training, pay per diem. Just bring an expert into your agency. It probably comes out to about the same as sending most of your units somewhere else, and you're going to get so much more out of it. The hands-on training, look Cameron up. We're going to be moving. If there's a detection 5.0, he's going to be at the head of this, and that'll be probably the title of
that'll be the next. That'll be the Cameron after me. Who that guy
I think you did talk about at some point certifying, because like you said, in the bite world, and there's certification for trainers, maybe starting to certify.
So it is starting. That's I've done now a couple times up at Santa Rosa. I've done some schools there. LAPD. We've already been contacted now by another agency out on the East Coast. There's a couple other ones, but that's what you just said. It made more sense for them to bring me to them, spend 2 weeks with them
Absolutely.
in their field, with their training tools, with their training aids, their dogs. And I
Get so much more out of it.
80 hours. Then who those that are the trainers will get educated and certified. So that way there's something out there that's, in a sense, independent from the agency, but is a proven education-based system. But I'll end it with this because I want all trainers to understand this, because it took me a long time to learn this. Like we kind of said, there is no one way. So don't feel that you have to be on one side of the fence or the other side of the fence on a training topic, because both sides have their truths to them. Both sides, depending on the lens, sees it in this way. What you have to see is what works for you and your dog, and be okay with it if it goes kind of against what the norm was. But if the results get you what you want, that's what matters. This is the biggest thing I left those trainers with in LA was like, hey guys, our goal is the end state. We want dogs to be highly efficient in their searching skills. Handlers be really good. I'll give you the 3 things. My first thing my dog's got to do is search. Second thing is tell me the odor is there. Third thing is stay there. If I can do those 3 things, how pretty the alert is, how did I use simultaneous or delayed, I don't give a shit what that was. Do these 3 things. Search, know what you're looking for, stay there when you found it. Handler's job. Bring the dog to the search area, have situational awareness, know what's in your environment, and what's maybe your plan to search it, but be willing to adjust as soon as you do. The most important thing, which is still technically the second thing, be able to read your dog. Know when your dog, be confident in reading your dog. Know when your dog is smelling something of interest, and when your dog is actually smelling odor, or when your dog has clearly told you there's nothing there. The biggest mistake that I've seen trainers doing, besides the patience part of it, is not doing blanks. Blanks is probably the number one thing that will solve your false alert problems, because blanks bleed into a lot of other things, predictability, time, handler behavior, because the longer it goes and you haven't found it, handlers start changing.
Start doing weird shit.
Dogs start searching harder because they haven't found it quite quick enough yet. And that gets interpreted as, ooh, there's something there because a dog is searching harder. So these are all things I want trainers and handlers to feel. You have freedom to kind of try some things. You have the understanding of it's the end state. What is the results? And if you get results from what you're doing, then stick to what you're doing. If you want to get better, be willing to make whatever adjustments that are needed, but don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Don't go, because Cameron said delayed conditioning and marker training was the only way to go. I do markers, and I also don't do markers. I stole this from my friend from Austria. He calls it announced and unannounced rewards. Announced rewards are markers. You're giving a signal, it means reward. Unannounced, I'm just throwing the toy in. He's ready to do an unannounced reward whenever he wants to, because he can walk holding the toy in his hand. But if he doesn't have a toy in his hand and the toy's in his pocket, he's probably going to do an announced reward, a marker, because taking it out of your pocket, all that movement, is probably going to draw the dog's attention. But if you have a toy and you're capable of doing it, sometimes pay right there. Perfectly fine. Sometimes use a marker. It does not have to be one or the other. Have the flexibility.
That's life.
Good stuff.
Yeah.
We really appreciate
Cameron,
it coming out.
thank you very
man.
much.
It's been great.
Has been.
In the meantime,
Train hard.
and be safe.